Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. A short 20-minute trip takes us to our next destination in Suffolk, towards an impressive set of remains of a 14th century Premonstratensian abbey. Known as one of the best preserved monastic sites left in Suffolk, and another set of historic hidden remains that are waiting to be rediscovered, with tales of a demonic black dog. Join us as we wander the remains of LEISTON Abbey. The abbey belonged to the Premonstratensians, a reformed order of white-habited canons that were founded by St Norbert in northern France. The order were very strict and preferred isolated locations like Minsmere, which was kept well away from the town. The site was founded in 1182 and built by Ranulph de Glanville, who was part of Henry II's Chief Justice. But with the site being built on a marshland at Minsmere, it was often very flooded, and eventually the canons were forced to move their community further inland to the current site that we walk around of LEISTON. Stone by stone, in around 1363, and under the instructions and orders from the Earl of Suffolk, Robert de Ufford, the people who had lived and worked here wore black and white robes and were ordained priests, unlike the monks of other religious orders. The canons here, as part of their order, did not have to have their heads shaved and were allowed to sport beards. Sadly, after completion of the abbey, it burned down, and the canons painstakingly rebuilt it again. The canons were able to upcycle much of its original materials, but incorporated new functional and stylistic elements that were needed to keep up with the architectural trends. Many of these trends are still visible when walking around the abbey site. The 14th century outside walls were finished with fine checkerwork, whilst the windows have an intricate tracery pattern. The whole of LEISTON Abbey was classed as an area of increased importance, so they maintained that it would have had tightly controlled access. The inner precinct was the heart of the domestic and spiritual life. Some of the buildings were used for prayers and worship, whilst other areas were used for bookkeeping, washing, resting, storage and eating. Interestingly, several of the key buildings that would have once been of the greatest importance to the abbey's functions are still missing and yet to be discovered, including that of the gatehouse. The gatehouse would have been very important because it would have controlled all incoming and outgoing access, and the infirmary as well, which was a place that cared for the lay brothers, the canons and the community, and also the all-important kitchens. When overlooking the abbey church, just like many of the other abbeys, it's the main building that is always relentlessly decorated, looked after and more or less the most beautiful building on site. The church was built in the form of a cross, with two chapels on either side of the chancel, which was the area just in front of the altar. The Lady Chapel, as it's known, is on the left of here, and it would have been roofed and occasionally used for services. We luckily get the chance to head inside and see around this small, beautiful and intimate chapel room, and it's still occasionally in use nowadays for worship or music recitals, and it's just a beautiful place to have a look around in. The stone that was used to build the church and the abbey would have been reused and repurposed from the earlier abbey at Minsmere, just 3 miles south from Leiston. Incredibly, some of the ornamental stone capitals, which are between the columns and the arches, were reused and unrecarved nearly 200 years later after they were first placed at Minsmere. It's quite common for buildings in East Anglia to have stone taken from one building to another, but it was very rare and unusual for the stone not to be recarved to fit in with the current trend of the day. When we take a walk around the Abbey Church, you'll see glimpses of the incredible arches and the flintwork that can be seen. I love the checkerboard design on the back of the chapel. As you walk around the eastern wall, you can see the remains of the decorative panels built from flint in a stone framing. And I really love the look of the large windows that would have once been filled with beautiful stained glass, as well as seeing the size of the east window, just how large the abbey would have been back in its heyday. After enjoying some of the tales of our previous visits to places, I had to have a look into if Leiston was haunted, because it strangely felt eerie here, and I came across a story of a supernatural dog known as the Black Shuck, who roamed and growled the countryside around Leiston Abbey around 500 years ago. Interestingly, a team of diggers named Dig Ventures unearthed the bones of a gigantic dog from a shallow grave in the ruins of Leiston Abbey, and the archaeologists estimate that the canine in question stood more than 7 feet tall on its hind legs and weighed around 200 pounds. They estimate the bones to date to when the abbey was active, but they are still unsure. All that was speculated was that these large canine bones could be connected to the legend of the Black Shuck. A hellhound or devil dog was the thought of a supernatural animal that was often found amongst mythology and fiction. The hellhound legend dates right back to the ancient times, and sightings and attacks have been reported throughout history. The legend has it that the Black Shuck donned the appearance of black fur, glowing evil red eyes, and large pointed teeth. Devil dogs would normally guard the entrance to the underworld and roamed the grounds of the graveyards. Shuck's most famous attack happened in August of 1577 at 2 nearby churches in Blythburgh and Bungay in the English countryside. During a terrible storm, the Black Shuck burst through the doors of the Holy Trinity Church in Blythburgh and charged with all of its might through a large congregation. During this attack, he killed a man and a boy before the church steeple collapsed through the roof. As the hound ran, he left claw marks on the north door that are still apparently visible today. This story is incredibly interesting and fun to hear, but the giant remains of a dog found at Leiston was more than likely the abbot's trusty companion or hunting dog, but it will always remain a mystery that we'll never truly know. After peeking through a number of fenced-off buildings, we walk inside what was once the refectory, or more commonly known as the dining room. Just right of the refectory was a small room where the brothers would have washed their hands before eating. Normally, Inside the refectory, whilst the canons were eating, the Bible would be being read to them. Records of inspections from the Mother Abbey back in France tell of life for the monks that once lived here. An inventory was made just before the abbey was dissolved, and it describes the church as having copper and silver candlesticks standing on top of the altars, and that the monks slept on old mattresses full of feathers, with shabby and unkept hangings. The carpets were also described as poor and scruffy. But even though it might have said poor, at the time most monastic orders or buildings were not even able to afford such luxuries, showing that Leiston did still have some wealth. The kitchen also had worn table linen and old brass pots, but the monks were not concerned with their dinnerware. They had the most valuable items, which were their cattle, their horses and sheep, and of course the abundance of corn in their fields, showing how they were able to self-sustain living. Another very important room was the chapter house, where all of the business was conducted and important meetings were held. You can still see very faint red scorch marks, which historians think may have been caused by the fire in 1389. Leiston, along with many other monasteries, was dissolved by King Henry VIII, and in 1537 the community was turfed out of their homes, and the last abbot was given a small pension. The ordained priests were given a choice. They could either leave or transfer to another abbey of the same order. Then the abbey became a Georgian farmyard, until saved from further decay later. Some of this was built over and was also extended in 1924 as a religious retreat centre. It's now occupied by the Pro Corder Society, a place for young musicians since 1974. I took a walk inside the remaining turret at the abbey. It was once part of a grand entrance into the canons' living accommodation, and their abbot's apartment would have been on the first floor. The turret was built in the 16th century of brick, mainly because of the mass shortage at the time in the area, and they tried to blend it in with the other exterior of the building by plastering it internally. When visiting the abbey, be wary that there are no toilets or facilities, but there is plenty of free parking on a gravel car park to the right of the abbey. Dogs are welcome, and you should be mindful when walking the grounds as the surfaces are uneven. Saying that, it's a pleasant place to enjoy the surroundings and a good afternoon's visit. We've really enjoyed our visit to LEISTON Abbey and hope you've enjoyed walking with us. If you have, please be sure to hit that like button, turn on the bell for notifications, and consider joining us on our Patreon or as members of the channel using the links in the description down below. We want to say a big thank you to our Patreons and our members for supporting the channel. We'll see you in the next one. Till next time.